Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Aleph Book Company and Crossword, I'm delighted to have you at the virtual launch of Finding Meaning in Life with the Bhagavad Gita by Nima Majmudar, Nandini Mirani, and Saloni Zaveri, a book which gives us an insight into the core teachings of the Bhagavad Gita and how to lead a fulfilling and meaningful existence. What brings the fulfillment that one is really looking for? Seeking an answer to this question is what led Nima Majmudar to study the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Sanskrit with Swami Dayanand Saraswati. And after almost 20 years at the United Nations, she decided to move on to becoming a full time teacher of Vedanta and the Gita. At these Vedanta classes is where the idea of this project and eventually the book came about in collaboration with her students Nandini Mirani and Saloni Zaveri. Nandini Mirani is a lifelong learner who combines her passion for reading and writing with a study of Vedanta. She serves as vice chair of the non-profit MPUH Hospital. Learning and being eternally on the journey of life keeps Saloni young and active. When not traveling, organic farming, doing yoga, or figuring out holistic health options, you will find her reading and reflecting on the science of Vedanta and about nutrition and health. We are very excited to have amongst us best-selling author and master storyteller Ashwin Sangi, who needs no introduction and who will be in conversation with the authors today. Over to you, Mr. Sangi.
Thank you, Gitu. Thank you very much. And frankly, I must tell you guys, I'm wondering as to what I'm doing here. I'm in the presence of so many distinguished individuals who have a lot of wisdom, who have a lot of knowledge. And here I am, an absolutely simple paperback storyteller who spins his yarns. And I'm wondering as to why you've invited me, Nima. So we'll get to it. Probably by the time we reach the end of this session, we'll understand why you've invited me, hopefully, fingers crossed. But in the meantime, I'm delighted to be here with all of you. And hopefully we will keep this a lively session over the next 45 minutes to 60 minutes. So let me start with you, really, Nima. You know, I mean, I was looking at your bio, and you are someone who has an MBA from Columbia, and you've worked in the United Nations. Um, and then suddenly there is this entire turn in your life where you suddenly become a teacher of sorts, and the entire exposure to Dayanand Saraswati ji, and but in the process you've ended up influencing so many other lives, and that has eventually, of course, led to this book. So could you give us a little bit of an insight into how that journey was? How did it happen?
Thank you, Ashwin. That's a very interesting question. When I was 20 years old, just like every other person in Bombay who was aspiring to go to the US for higher studies, I went there and I was in New York. And I mean, I loved my time there and I learned a lot. Only one thing I observed, and that is that, I kind of saw very clearly that the human struggles that we face in India, they are the same, right? I mean, they have much better houses, they have better cars, but they all struggle with life. And that was very clear to me. And that's when I think my mind started kind of asking a question as to, what are we really looking for? Here, we Indians, we aspire and, we want great jobs and all, and, we want lovely homes and all of that, but they have it all and they still are struggling. So these are the questions that were in my mind, and they were just there and I didn't quite know how to, answer them. But once I was just visiting one university and I saw a poster by Swami Dayananda, and I didn't know who he was. But what really attracted me was the poster, the title of the talk that he was giving. And the title was, "Who are you and what's your relationship with the universe and the cause of the universe?" And I said, wow, who even attempts to answer a question like that, right? It's a very fundamental question, because generally when you go to spiritual talks, they kind of give you practices, they just kind of make you sit and do something with your body or whatever, your mind, but nobody attempts to answer such kind of fundamental questions. So I went out of curiosity, and two things attracted me, Ashwin, in his talk. One is, he said that, this is not my teaching, this is the spiritual heritage of India, this is something which is from the Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita. And then there is a student a teacher lineage, Guru Shishya Parampara, and I only belong to that, and I have learned and I'm passing on this teaching, which really impressed me, because I thought that, I didn't want to follow anybody, I was looking for answers, and I think I found the person who had right approach to this learning, and it was not following anybody. And the second thing which attracted me is that he said that both Upanishads and Gita are in a form of dialogue, because they show realities which are very big in nature. So anybody who's looking into it would are is bound to have questions. So questions
So,
and
so I mean,
dialogue.
as I joke sometimes that yesterday's Gita would
Yes,
have been today's FAQs, frequently asked questions, because the entire FAQ is this
yes,
set of questions between Arjun and Krishna. So,
absolutely.
yeah. So in that sense, did you find that the Gita was actually giving you answers, or did you find that it was actually helping you ask the right questions?
Both, I think. Initially, it takes any thinking human being, I mean, at least the way I was, I didn't immediately buy everything that what was being said. But what I liked, Ashwin, was the approach was asking, exploring, not prescriptive, not preachy, which I actually attracted me tremendously. As I began to reflect on it a little bit more, I saw that how uncontradictable some of the things were, and over a period of time, I think in 5 years, it was very clear to me that this knowledge is something which is a gold mine, and I cannot live my life without exploring it a little bit more. So that's when I actually decided to study with him. And I went and I stayed with him for 3.5 years, and I studied with him all the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Sanskrit, Vedic chanting. So my whole life was immersed in that for 3.5 years. And then, of course, 20 or 30 years after that. So,
Incredible. What a life story. Maybe one day this could be novelized. I don't know. I
yeah,
guess
maybe we can collaborate.
Wonderful. So, I wanted to, before I get into the actual book itself, and by the way, for those of you who are listening to us, this is a must read book. It is absolutely fascinating. And even for those who are really not sort of within that domain, it's easy reading, but with जिसे कहते हैं रस, रस भर भर के इस किताब में भरा हुआ है. So I wanted to ask you in particular. Let me start with Saloni. That Saloni, I last knew you in Cathedral School, and of course after that you went on to Barnard College and founded a technology company. And suddenly, again, this is what I'm finding incredible. This book bringing people from such different backgrounds into something which is that common thread between all of them. So, for you, how did you land up into this book project, and how did the book evolve?
So that's a lovely question, and there's a lovely story behind it.
Okay.
So we had just sold our business, and I had stopped working. And this friend rang me, and said, "You've got to come to this class. I have this wonderful lady teacher teaching in my house." And I have to tell you, I mean, the idea of learning Vedanta just did not appeal to me.
Okay.
And she was so insistent, you know who I'm talking about, Nima, that I said, fine. So I told her, I said, I promise I'll come to you with an open mind. And my intention was to just go for 2 classes and leave it at that. And then Nima's classes was so, I'm using the word attractive here because I felt myself really mesmerized to that topic, to the way she taught it. In fact, I can still remember her words from the first class, and I had written them in the book. And Nima said, what I teach is not what you write down. But anyway, and so we did a number of texts, and then she did the Gita. I think it was the second or the third text that we did together. And each lesson was fantastic. I mean, so at the end of it, one was that I was at a loss when it was finished. And second was I felt like I didn't know the whole story. I only knew individual verses and what appealed to me in the verse. And so in an attempt to make that story come together, we had a whole revision session. And at the end of the revision session, Nima she sort of did an express Gita for us again. And I made notes, and I suggested that I would collate the notes for the whole class. And at the time of the revision, Nandini was so incredibly articulate and fabulous that I requested her to please join us. And then one day, Namita Devidyal and Rishad Santok and Anne, who is the German artist, was sitting at Nima's house. And I was telling Namita that you should put this in the newspaper in that Sunday speaking tree.
Yeah.
And Rishad said, but you guys are working so hard. Why don't you make a book out of this? And suddenly we were like, wow, we never thought of that. And Namita said, yeah, I'll introduce you to all the publishers that I know, because she's a published author, as you know.
Correct.
And from then it took Nandini, Nima and me about a year of the most fun sessions to write the book. And then the pandemic came along, and actually Nandini rewrote the whole book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and at that time we weren't meeting so often. I mean, we weren't meeting at all. So it was quite incredible. The process of first the book was written when we were all together, and then there was this process of where she rewrote the book, and then Nima and I worked on parts of it, tried to insert examples. And then the publishers were very kind. They brought the publishing of the book forward. And so that's how we came together, actually.
But Saloni, I find this rather remarkable because, I'm just thinking to my time in school, college, and university. And if you had told me that write a book along with one of your professors, it would have been daunting, frankly, So I'm just wondering, how do teachers and students collaborate?
Well, Nima was an incredible guide. I mean, it was notes. It was never that this is our book. And as Nima said right in the beginning, this is the wisdom of the Gita. There's a chapter on the Gita that this is a lineage. You are only a medium to bring it forward. And so this was notes. So once the notes were written, it was about refining the notes. And then Nima was so wonderful in guiding, and Nandini was so precise with her words and the nuances that we wanted to say, that I wouldn't say it was collaborating with my professor. It was my professor was just guiding both of us.
Lovely.
Really. And
That's
shaping us.
That's beautiful. So let me, since there has been so much praise for Nandini's work, let me now take the next question to Nandini, which is that, we all know that the Gita is this really vast work. And even for the uninitiated like me, I'm told that it's something like around 700 odd verses. But this is a book which focuses on 45 verses. And those are the 45 verses that have been so beautifully encapsulated and explained within this book. So what is it? What was the process of selecting what you would keep in and what you would not take into this book? How did this process work? And was that a joint effort, or was that any one individual amongst the three of you?
So the verses, nice to talk to you, Ashwin. The verses were selected by Nima, the 45 verses, and those are the 45 verses that she has one of her Gita classes around those 45 verses.
Okay.
And I was actually pulled into Nima's class many years ago by Saloni, who called me up one day and told me, just come. just like she said, she told me, just come. And I walked into the first class. It was the first starting of the Gita class. And I was hooked from the very first class,
Wow.
So, but it's something that I guess it was a journey for me that must have begun about 10, 15 years ago before that, because I was exploring, trying to understand death and mortality and questions
Sure.
around that. So reading around that. So I thought
Sure.
I got it at the right time and it was a perfect fit. But,
Sure.
I could talk about the writing experience, which was very challenging because of the topic and also very exhilarating because of the topic. So I was quite awed by the fact that the more I engaged with the words and the sentences, the more I was actually engaging with the teaching itself, which was quite an invaluable perk to have.
You know,
And
they
yeah.
say that it's quite easy to make something sound complicated, but it's very, very difficult to take something that's complex and to distill it into something which is close to simplicity. And that's one of the thoughts that came to me, except for a couple of sections in the book, which I'm going to talk about later on, where I went into a bit of a tizzy and I was just like, okay, what does this mean? But otherwise, for most part, you've succeeded in bringing about simplicity. So how did that process work?
So, what actually happened was I felt that one of the challenges I faced is I felt I've understood a concept. But
Sure.
when I actually had to write it and write it in a simple way, I realized it requires altogether a different level of clarity altogether. So it is to Nima's credit that she had the patience to kind of go over and over and over again. A lot of the the topics and the concepts and the ideas had to be discussed over and over again.
Sure.
And another challenge that we faced with the project was these 45 verses. So and to achieve continuity and flow in the book with verses that have been selected from across the Gita. So what we felt is that when these verses are taught verbally, then you have the benefit of kind of filling in the gaps, going back and forth, all of that.
Sure.
And so slowly I began to be convinced about the fact that the verses need to be reordered. They need to be put into these broad topics, 5 broad topics. And Nima has, asked me actually to share today how I had to muster up the courage to, sell this idea to her and to figure out a way how to make my case, because it meant changing the order from the actual Gita.
So was this a decision in terms of, I noticed, for example, you've sort of structured the entire book in broad sections like vision, action, cause, growth, knowledge. So this was not the way you originally started out?
No. We originally started out by showing the verses in the actual order in which they come in the Gita. And the Gita is a book that goes back and forth between the Brahma Vidya and the Yoga Shastra, meaning between the big picture and the day-to-day living.
Right.
And because it goes back and forth, and you don't have the benefit of a teacher in front of you to guide you through that process when you're reading a book.
Sure.
I thought the book would benefit. It would be easier to understand if we could group these ideas together. So Nima was eventually convinced about it. And, I think we have a book that's sort of easier to read because of that.
That's the essence of a great teacher, knowing when to step back. So, kudos to all of you for making this collaboration really work. So, let me come back to Nima. Nima, I'm going to start with a very, very, this is now cocktail party talk. I hear these people at parties, and they say, when we ever talk about religion or anything like that, they say, no, Ashwin, I'm not a religious person, but I am spiritual. And it's a very, very cliched statement. I hear it a couple of thousand times probably by the end of it. And I'm wondering as to whether they even know the S of spirituality, because I certainly don't. For me, spirituality means my evening malt whiskey, frankly. So, the point is really, what I want to ask you is the Gita a religious book? Or is it spiritual? Or is it that we don't know what spiritual is? Or is religious and spiritual the same thing? What is the Gita?
Excellent. So first, let's a little bit define. This is a very, very interesting question because the first thing that even when people come to my class, they think that they are very sophisticated. So they also introduce them to me, saying that I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, and I kind of little bit laugh at to myself because I don't know. I mean, because whole Gita, the 6 chapters of the Gita are about Ishvara, the cause of the universe. And it very deeply talks about the relating to the cause of the universe as a very integral and essential part of our growth. So by no means anybody can say that the book is not religious. I mean, it's not true. Absolutely. But what it does is it redefines what religious life is, because
Okay.
normally what our understanding is about religion is that we accept some higher force out there and we kind of surrender to it, and that higher force will redeem us, so we don't have to do anything. We just kind of ask for grace and everything is taken care of. Whereas Bhagavad Gita's vision about what the nature of the cause is fundamentally different from what we call a normal religious view. So, what
Okay.
it sees the cause of the universe as not a person sitting away from you, but intelligence which pervades the entire universe. So, that means now imagine if there is an intelligence which pervades the entire universe and you're oblivious to it. Can you grow as a human being? So,
Correct.
spirituality is about human growth. And the very essential part of human growth is to understand realities and align to them. So, therefore, if there is a presence and if you keep missing that presence and you call yourself spiritual, you don't know what you're talking about. So, therefore, I would say Gita is highly spiritual because it is focused on your personal growth and your personal journey to discovering realities and living meaningfully. And in that journey, you can't escape your relationship with the cause of the universe. It comes, it's one of the very integral part of that journey. So, it is religious and it is spiritual both, I think.
Amazing. I read, in fact, I used this line in one of my books where I said the word yog comes from the same root as the word yoke, that you are in some ways yoking yourself to the wider universe, and that comes across so beautifully in these 45 verses that have been selected, because you seem to be in some ways the idea of sort of understanding that you are connected, and that you are not distinct and separate, that you're connected, and that awareness of being connected seems to come across so beautifully. uh, Let me take you then in that case to the topic of today, Nima, which is the science of spirituality. And there is an old saying that every good scientist should also be a philosopher, and every philosopher must also be a good scientist. And when I read your book, I really found that you've spent a great deal of time on the interconnectedness of the world, and how realization ultimately lies in understanding that there is no separation of me. I mean, that comes across so loudly in the book, that we are not distinct and separate from millions of interconnections. But isn't that what quantum theory is now telling us? So, in that sense, do you think that in some ways, Vedanta and the Bhagavad Gita, in some ways, were the scientists of their times?
Wow. Fundamentally, Ashwin, there is a traditional view of what Bhagavad Gita is, and we say that it is a means of knowledge. So,
Hmm.
a means of knowledge, it means that it makes you explore realities which are
Hmm.
not available for observation. So that means you cannot do an empirical research, right? So science is based on observation and inference based on observation.
Hmm.
Whereas here, the very topic is what is the nature of the observer. So that
Hmm.
means you can't observe the nature of the observer. You also cannot observe the cause of the universe as a given object. So
Okay.
therefore, if you want to use scientific method, they are not kind of applicable in this case. They will not lead to the answer of what is the nature of the cause of the universe and what's your true nature, and how both happen to be one final reality. That is not something which is, because it is not a given thing in this universe, it's not within the purview of science. But at the same time, there is for it to be a pramana, there is a second condition. And the second condition is that if what Vedanta is saying is the truth, then it cannot be contradicted by logic. So this is where science walks in. So that means long ago, in Chandogya Upanishad, it was mentioned that the universe is mithya. Mithya means it has a dependent reality. It is not as real as it seems. And the quantum physics was not even there at that time. This is
Correct.
thousands of years ago. And now the discoveries of quantum physics make it so clear that this universe is not as tangible as we think it is. And, it just goes on reducing to forms within forms within forms. And finally, there is no ultimate reality that you can pinpoint as the building block of the universe. So that means what I would say, Ashwin, is that there is a convergence between science and Vedanta and Bhagavad Gita, but it is not kind of talking about the same thing. So they have their own individual sphere within which they work.
Would it be wrong of me to say that the scientist is looking outside at the world, whereas the rishi is looking within in order to discover the same answers? Or would that be too much of an oversimplification?
That would be too much of a simplification, because the rishis are looking at the one truth which pervades everything inside and outside. What is that fundamental, irreducible reality of the universe which pervades everything, which pervades time, which pervades space, which pervades every object in the universe, and it is present everywhere. So that means it's neither inside nor it is outside. It is the very basis of all the forms, and it is in and through everything, but it is free from everything. So that's why that it includes everything, but it is not form. It is the truth of all the forms.
So, in your book, I came across one very interesting concept, which was called I sense. And of course,
Yes.
prior to this, I had heard of the iPhone, the iMac, the iPod, the iCloud. And now suddenly Nima and Nandini and Saloni are introducing me to this concept of I sense. And now, uh, please bear with me. I'm not talking nonsense. I'm talking I sense for the moment. That 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 could you elaborate a little bit on this? That, because I think you included this in terms of almost four concepts, but you said that this is a particular thing which eventually we need to work on. So, in what way do we work on it, and how does the Gita help you work on it?
Okay, so that means, suppose you want to work on yourself, you first need to understand that there is one bigger reality about you which you need to understand. But the mind, which is preoccupied with small things, is not able to get to this bigger reality. So that's why Gita focuses a lot on preparing the mind so that it can actually inquire into such a big question like who am I, and what is the nature of the cause, and how am I related to it. So therefore, in order to work on the mind, it divides the mind in four different categories depending upon the function. One is manas, which is emoting mind. The second is buddhi, which is cognitive mind. The third is your chittam, with your memory. And the fourth is I sense. So I sense, in Sanskrit, it is called ahankara. So everybody knows ahankara. Unfortunately, people think ahankara means ego, right? Or being proud.
Correct.
But here,
Correct.
when the scriptures talk about ahankara, they are not talking about pride or anything. They are talking about a function of the mind which has I sense. So what it means, Ashwin, is that, every day there are thousands of things happening. You have thousands of thoughts. Your body is constantly changing. But we have this, our understanding of ourselves is a constant entity. So how
Okay.
come in a constantly changing world we have a stable sense of I? And that is because of our eye sense, which kind of connects all the activities that are taking place at the level of body, the activities which are taking place at the level of mind to eye. So therefore, for example, right, when you hurt your arm, generally we say, I'm injured. So that means what has actually happened is one little bone here is a little damage, and you say, I am hurt. So this
Correct.
is what we call I sense. Or you have thousands of thoughts in a day, and one thought is suppose sadness, then you say, I am sad. So that means what is the reality that you had 60,000 thoughts, but now that one given thought has become whole of I. So this is your I sense, which connects all the activities of senses, mind, and the body to your eye sense, which makes your own narrative of who you are and how are you living in this world, and how do you find the world, and how do you find your place in the grand scheme of things.
Incredible. In, all of this is coming across. Uh, I'm like each time almost hitting myself that this is common sense. Why the hell didn't I think of it that way? You know. But I guess, as they say, common sense is not that common. So probably, But
I have to say something here.
sure,
Because
please.
of lockdown, I had my daughter at home sometimes, and I thought that I will expose her to the Gita by having Nima's class on. And
Okay,
she listened to it, and then she gets up at the end of it and says, I don't know, everything that she said was all common sense. So I knew
incredible.
it all. She said, I knew it all, it was all common sense. So
Precisely. And I think the three of you have done a tremendous job in being able to make it feel like common sense. I mean, the book doesn't come across as being preachy. It does not come across as being something which is, and frankly, the only observation I had was, why didn't I think of it this way? I mean, and that's something, it's almost like that aha moment where you say, oh, it was right there in front of me. So this is certainly a book which I don't think that people who like this book are going to read it once. They are probably going to go back to it at least 2 or 3 times, because you've also thrown in a few zingers in there. So I mean, stuff which you need to sort of go back to, and you're wondering, oh, what was meant by this particular statement. So I want to ask you, what I notice is one of the things that is talked about is the notion of Brahma Vidya and Yoga Shastra. And one of those beautiful metaphors in this book, uh, and that's one of the other things that I like about the book, because you use a lot of these metaphors, which makes it far easier to understand the concepts. But the three pots of water, one containing murky water, one containing agitated water, and one clear and calm water, and which of those will the sun's reflection emerge from? I love that. It just sort of made things so apparent in some ways. So, how important is this concept of Brahma Vidya versus Yoga Shastra, or are they both equally important?
Both are extremely important. In fact, the whole, whether you study Upanishad or you study Bhagavad Gita, both of them have two components, right, to this inquiry. One is a bigger picture, which is Brahma Vidya, and that has three pillars. The first
Okay,
is, who are you, right? So, as I said,
okay,
our identity ends with this I sense that we have, but according to the Upanishads, this is just one of the functions of your mind, and that also keeps changing all the time. There is a more fundamental reality about you, which is Brahman, which is the truth of everything. And that's actually what we need to discover. So, this is what the pillar where you start with who am I and move beyond your mind and discover something which is the final reality about you. Then there is another that's not over, right? Because you still need to kind of ask one more question. What is this world, and how come I find myself in it, and what is the cause of the world? So this
yes,
is why the second pillar of this bigger picture is the Ishvara, which is the cause of the universe. And the third is the universe itself and your relationship with it, and that is called Jagat. So in Sanskrit, we call it an inquiry into Jiva, Jagat, and Ishvara. And that is Brahma Vidya. And then, but this is too big a topic. So, as you very rightly said, in this example of three pots, right? Now, sun is shining, this amazing knowledge is shining, but if your mind is murky, and if your mind is full of mud and wavy and all that, that amazing knowledge, which is like sun and shining and showing this amazing reality, which is all pervading, but we miss, that will not shine unless you make your mind clear. So, Yoga Shastra is about actually undertaking that whole growth process so that that reality shines in your head as clear as daylight. So that is the purpose of Yoga Shastra, to prepare the mind to undertake that inquiry so you understand the oneness in the universe. It doesn't just become a textbook thing, it becomes your vision of reality, and that's how you live your life. So this is why preparing the mind is a very integral part of, studying Vedanta and Bhagavad Gita.
Amazing. Amazing. There was another concept which fascinated me, which was in fact you briefly referred to it in one of your answers right now. The idea of Satyam versus Mithya, and again, the reason why I really find this so closely connected with science is because I would never expect in a book like this to be reading about dependent and independent variables, but which is precisely how it has been described, that we think of Mithya as an illusion of sorts, whereas, or a myth. But on the other hand, actually, what we are talking about is Satyam being the independent variable and Mithya being the dependent one. And of course, again, you've thrown in a metaphor which is about the clay and the earthen pot, one being independent and one being dependent. But I was just wondering, and this was a question which came to my mind related to the dharmic world that India sort of in some ways represents, that we as a country have always embraced multiple truths. I mean, 33 million deities can be part of the same family. Christ can be incorporated on a temple. Buddha can be absorbed as an avatar of Vishnu. Uh, Even paths that we take, whether it is someone may say I'm Astic, the other person may say I'm Nastic, I'm a Shaivite, Vaishnavite, I'm a vegetarian, carnivore, fire worshipper, idol worshipper, nature worshipper. Someone says, Shiva, someone says Shakti, someone's combination of both. There are methods like yantra, tantra, mantra. In some ways, is the fact that we have all of this because we understand that at the end of the day, all of this is ultimately related to Satyam. In some ways, that the underlying reality is one is could this be an explanation for the way we are as a nation?
Yeah. Okay, great. So that's a very interesting question, Ashwin. See, for us, as I told you, that Ishvara is not an entity, it's not a person, right? So it
Okay.
is the intelligence which pervades everything. So that means where quantum physics ends, where they say that actually we can't find the final building block,
Yes.
Vedanta walks in and it says that, things get fuzzy because you can't put your hand onto anything ultimately after atoms and particles. And that's where Vedanta says that the truth of all these forms is not yet another form, but it is the intelligence. So there is this intelligence which is Ishvara, from which all the forms come, and by which all these forms are organized in different permutations and combinations to make this varied universe. So this is why we look upon the whole universe as nothing but manifestation of Ishvara. It includes everything. Nothing is excluded in that. And this is why all these devatas that you're talking about, Ashwin, they're all just actually looking at that intelligence from different standpoints, right? Different phenomena. Just like, you have access to knowledge, but you call it biology when you focus on the plant kingdom. You call it
That's right.
physics when you actually, but it's all knowledge. And similarly, right, devatas are all these different phenomena of one reality, which is one intelligence. So we are not opposed to anything. Every form is a manifestation of Ishvara. And that has two very major implications. The first implication is that, in so-called spiritual circles, they talk about spiritual world is one thing and material world is something quite different. There is
Yes.
no such thing, because Ishvara pervades everything, includes everything. So that means there is only one world. Either you understand it and live in it meaningfully, or you don't understand it and you struggle. So there are no such thing called one's material world and the other is spiritual world. There is no such thing. It's a vision of oneness. Oneness
So
includes everything. So
that
this
dichotomy is a construct that has been created by us in
absolutely.
some ways.
So, yeah, but at the same time, Ashwin, the forms are different. You can't deny the differences in form, but they are all different manifestations of one final reality, one intelligence, which then itself doesn't get affected by the forms, but the forms cannot exist without it. This is why it is Satya Mithya relationship.
In Nima, I'm just reading out a line from your book. In that you say that the cause of the universe, of course, is Ishvara, and then you say, "I'm the taste in water, I'm the light in the moon and sun, I'm the Om in the Vedas, I'm the sound in space, I'm the strength in human beings." I mean, it was a line that I just fell in love with. I went back to it again and again and again because it was so beautifully expressed. But the question that comes to my mind, and I'm sorry, this is probably a dumb question. If
No, nothing that you ask is
if
dumb, Ashwin.
yeah, there is an old proverb which says that there are no stupid questions, but there are stupid questioners. So at this moment of time, I'm just treating myself as the dumb questioner at this moment. But uh, the question there is really that in this book, I come across the statement that Ishvara has to precede the universe. It is from Ishvara that objects and space and time manifest. But then what precedes Ishvara? I mean, sorry, this is the classical chicken and egg story. Where does Ishvara come from? Or does he
Okay.
just appear in one day?
So this is where, Ashwin, there are two answers to that. See, being any cause has to precede the effect, right? You can't
Yes.
have a effect. So you have Jagat, what is universe, and that is time, space, object, universe. You must have a cause, right? Have you seen anything which comes into being without a cause? Now,
Right.
if the cause was already there, then why do you call the coming into being of the universe?
Okay.
That cause has to be there, but in a different form. So, this is why
Okay.
what we say is this intelligence was unmanifest, and what is so called creation is that intelligence manifests as time, space, and object universe. Just let's take our own examples, right? So, you create a dream world tonight, right? Now, you as a cause, you exist, the potential exists, but when the dream world comes, you become the cause of the dream world. Were you not there before?
Hmm.
You were
Okay.
there,
I was always there. I was
but
always.
you were not, still the dream was not there. So what
Yes.
made that dream come? And what, you were already there, you already held the potential, but there is an event which is coming into being of the dream, and then you are seen as the cause of that. So this is what Ishvara is. So it precedes the creation, it is in form of intelligence, and which holds the potential for the universe, and the creation is what we call manifestation, where time, space, and universe manifests. And then there is one final truth of Ishvara according to the Vedas. The story doesn't end with Ishvara, it ends with Brahman. Brahman
Okay.
is final irreducible reality of both Ishvara and a human being. And this is why there is an equation between you and the Ishvara, because everything reduces into Brahman. So, just to make it very easy, the tradition has an example, and that is a very easy example. Wave is an individual, ocean is the total which contains all the waves. It precedes coming of the
Sure.
waves. But the final truth of both ocean and wave is water. And that is the final truth of everything. It is the uncaused cause from which everything has come. And that uncaused cause, so suppose you have to look for water. Where is it? Everywhere.
Usually you won't find it in my whiskey glass. I'm usually one of those who always drinks it neat.
Okay, but at the same time, your body has water, right? So Ashwin, you can't escape water in
I know.
the
But
in the
I always joke that in case they were to do a blood test on me, they'd find that the alcohol content would be far greater than any other element. So I guess this is the reason why we are in conversation today, Nima, because of the fact that both of us have a spiritual context.
and very beautifully our scriptures, they are all encompassing. We celebrate everything. We don't have problem with anything. So
So Nima, for a minute, I want to go to a person uh, who is supposed to have looked at the very, very concise and precise nature of these words. And I'm going to throw this one at Nandini because, there is one particular statement in this book which I've still not figured out after reading it some 50 odd times. The one who sees actionlessness in action and action in actionlessness is a yogi. So I want Nandini to explain this one, and then I'm going to come back to you for your explanation.
Sure. So the first part of it, to see actionlessness in action, is when the Gita shows us that we are more than our body and our mind, that we have to place our I in a self-revealing presence which is within us. And so
Okay.
even when we are performing all the tasks that we are performing, whether I'm eating, drinking, sleeping, I'm performing action, but my I, the awareness, the I within me is actionless. So they say you should see actionlessness in action. And
Okay.
the other one is when you see action in actionlessness, is that if I can go to Duryodhan's example, where he chooses not to intervene in a war that he could have stopped.
Okay.
So so that is, somebody feels that if I feel that if I'm not getting involved in something, I am not performing an action. The Gita teaches us that any action, even not performing an action, is an act of free will.
Is an act.
And so
Okay.
by Duryodhan not doing what he needed to do, and by that we would refer to as seeing action in actionlessness.
Wonderful.
Not doing it is also an action. Not doing what you have to do is also an action.
So
So
Nima, tell me
sleeping,
something.
sitting, all of it is an action.
Understood. So
Yeah.
so then I want to take this to Nima now, and I want to ask that how does this tie in with this concept of karma yogi? How because you use this word several times. So how does this tie in with that?
okay. So one thing we do need to understand that finally what Bhagavad Gita is talking about is your real reality is Brahman. And that Brahman itself is actionless, right? So that there is no action. It has the capacity to manifest. The manifest universe comes within which you find yourself, but that awareness is not undertaking any actions. It's the
Okay.
body which undertaking actions. It's the mind which is undertaking actions. So as long as you think that you are an individual, you are an actor, right? You
Okay.
perform actions and you get results for those actions. Now when you come to know that you are that final reality, there is a paradigm shift. And when that paradigm shift occurs, even if your body is very active, even if
Well,
your mind is very active, what you understand yourself to be this final reality which has not undergone any change. So therefore, you can live in it's paradoxical, but you can live an extremely active and involved and engaged life, and still you understand your true nature to be actionless. Now, before you get there, right, it's not like you can pretend that I'm actionless and all that. So, until the time that you really understand this reality, you have to understand that your identity is as an individual. You can't just skip and pretend that I'm that final reality. So, till the time that you are an individual, till the time that you haven't understood that, you can't just leave everything and contemplate on that reality, because, as I told you, your mind has to be prepared. So living in life becomes very essential. Living life actually can teach you very important lessons, and that enables you to look at, how are you making decisions, what is your resilience when situations come, when challenges come, how is your emotional life, what is your self image. So all these, are you pretentious, are you proud, are you able to persevere things, or you're just kind of floating from one thing to
Sure.
the other. So these are the things that you do need to develop, and this is what we call through our interactions with the world. Even if we want to know the final reality, we try to gain that maturity. So in your example, make the water clear, and that is karma yoga. Karma yoga is for an individual who wants to know that final reality and yet is in the process of cleaning up here so that the mind can reach there, rather than pretending that that is the reality of me and trying to skip life, which is an unfortunate thing that happens a lot in spiritual world. They try to skip this life thinking that it's an illusion. Bhagavad Gita is, this is why it's a very important book, because it says, yes, ultimately you have to get there, but you need that the living for you, which is a problematic, challenging living, you first need to convert it into a meaningful living. And this is why the name of the book, adding meaning to your life, right? So through Bhagavad
Incredible.
Gita. So
Amazing. Thank you, Nima. Thank you. That gives me a sort something more to think about, really. But I want to ask you that, there is also a section in the book which talks about bhakti, and I'm just wondering that if I'm not one of those who wants to think about this philosophically, if I'm not one of those who sits down necessarily to meditate in order to look for the pauses between my thoughts, if I'm not one of those who is of a scientific bent of mind, but I'm one of those who loves to offer fruits and flowers and milk to Lord Shiva, and it comes out of just my heart and the spirit. And the other day I heard someone say that the word spiritual also contains the word ritual. So why do we consider ritual as completely disconnected from the word spiritual? So is there space in the Gita for a more homegrown, good old, good old fashioned puja path? Is there a is that a possible path to
um,
where we need to reach, or do we need to be high funda about it?
Okay, good question, Ashwin. See, there is a very common feeling that people have that Bhagavad Gita is talking about four different paths. One is
Yeah.
knowledge, jnana yoga for the intellectuals. The second one is, I think, yeah, you can make it mute because otherwise it's noisy. Yeah, okay, good. So, um, one is Gnana Yoga for the intellectuals. The second is Karma Yoga for the active. Then Bhakti Yoga for the devotional, and Raja Yoga for people who just kind of want to take care of themselves. So there are four different paths for four different kinds of people. Now, Bhagavad Gita actually doesn't talk about four paths for four different kinds of people. What it is talking about is that each one person must have all four. So that means that unless you have knowledge of what is really Ishvara, suppose I want to relate to you, can I relate to you without knowing who you are? So, therefore, if I want to relate to Ishvara, essentially I first need to know what Ishvara is in order for it to be a meaningful relationship. So, knowledge is required. Then, second, right? In order to get the knowledge, as I told you, a lifestyle of preparing the mind is required, which is karma yoga. Then as you begin to discover the all pervading presence of that intelligence, you can relate to that intelligence in so many different ways, right? So as you just rightly said, you can go to a temple and offer flowers to Shiva, you can look at the oceans, you can say namaskara to the sun, you can even before you dance, you can actually touch the earth and ask for its pardon. It is infinite engagement with that divinity, and that is bhakti. And finally, anything that you do, right, to just take care of your body and your mind in order to prepare yourself to just, physical health, that is Raja Yoga or meditation, sitting there where you can sit for a while with yourself. Your mind is not too distracted. So that means each person has to have all four. There is no such thing called division, and everything is included. So this is why rituals are very much part of this growing. And rituals are beautiful, Ashwin, because they are your expression to your connection with the universe. There is nothing wrong with that. So
I'd like I'd like to say something here as well.
1 minute, just can I finish? Otherwise, what happens is whole life, Ashwin, for us is lived in intellectual things, and we miss that connection and expression. And I think in order for our life to be complete, we need both understanding and expression. Then it becomes holistic. Otherwise, it's incomplete. Yeah, Saloni.
So basically, I wanted to say the same thing, is that you have to have the understanding and the expression. For example, I've grown up all my life doing a Shraddh ceremony, first for my Nana, then for my Ammaji, then for my Nani, and now for my father. And it was not mechanical, it was felt. But now, when we've done this Gita, where you say that there has to be gratitude, that you are what you are because of the connection you have with everybody, and that includes your ancestors, that includes people who help you, that includes everything around you. And so then the Shraddh has become so beautiful, because you're thanking your ancestors for who you are and the connections that you have today. So it was a ritual which didn't mean so much to me, but once you understand, the meaning is just incredibly beautiful.
So I totally agree with what Saloni is saying, because generally what has happened, Ashwin, is people don't understand the rituals. So this is why they've lost the meaning. So instead of giving them up, what we do need to do is to infuse the meaning so that they are done mindfully. Because otherwise, life becomes very isolated and very meaningless and very random and very, So we need to add that sense of celebration with divinity. This is our culture, and we need to bring it back. And I strongly believe that.
Ashwin, you're muted. Ashwin, you're muted.
Sorry, guys. I was trying to be careful. Uh, we have the last few minutes, and I wanted to actually end off on this whole concept of karma, because I think that is something which is topmost in a lot of people's minds. Uh, for me, I've always come up with very, very simplistic explanations. So when I look at my life, I think that I'm driving a car, and I'm driving that car on a bad road. So there are potholes, but there are also stretches which are great. And of course, I have the ability to be able to go uphill, downhill, take turns, and so on and so forth. And I've always thought of that as something related to something which is given to me on the one hand, what my destiny served up, and the other being related to my karma or my actions in some way. But you know, there was a time when I thought of it very differently. Being a Marwadi and a Banya who was always brought up in a world of bookkeeping, I always thought that everything in life, the debits and credits match up. So you can't afford to have a mismatched trial balance in some ways. They will always add up. But then I read about this so-called multidimensionality of time, and I began to wonder that, okay, I could be living my life in a parallel universe at the present moment, And then suddenly, when I eliminate the concept of sequential time, Nima, I'm wondering as to how I could possibly be punished for misdeeds of a previous life if I'm leading my life simultaneously. So, this concept of pap punya, can you give it a little more context for absolute gadhas like me?
Okay, so basically, let's come back to the definition. That's much easier to kind of start with, right?
Sure.
So, papa and punya are the unseen result of the actions that we perform today. See, for
Okay.
example, you have you just talked about the drinks, right, that you love.
Yes.
Now 20 years down the line, your
Yes.
body, the causes that you have created, can your body
Sure.
be free from it?
Right. Right. Hope. Well, I'm hoping that basically I will have taken care of all the required antibacterial elements.
Exactly.
Uh,
So that means you need to add things, right? So you can't just, so any cause that you create, and then if you expect that there is no consequence for that, that's unreasonable. So this is what we call that, and there may be a time lag, right? So just because you're not seeing the effect tomorrow, it doesn't mean that the universe is not able to carry the effect and produce that visible effect sometime in the future. So you do need to, and this is something very very easy. In the book we have given the example of the environmental problems that we are facing today. Now suppose I ask you, how many did you participate in that? But at the same time, you are there is a cause which is created. So there are two kinds of causes which are created. One is the causes which are created by us, and we have
yes.
to experience the result of it at some time,
Yes.
either now or in the remote future. And
Yes.
others are also creating causes, and then we have
Yes.
something called collective effects of collective actions. So
Yes.
the state of the environment is the causes which are created by so many people that we don't know, but they are created, so they have to produce an effect sometime in the future. So this is something very logical, because you can't conceive of a universe without cause and effect relationship. And it is just showing that, and it is only, we think very linearly that everything has to happen within our lifetime. We are talking about a 14 billion year old universe where the causes that were created there are impacting us. And then how is it that the universe is capable of connecting those remote causes to the present day? Then why not what we do today would have, some consequences in the future? When we look at the world through our limited mind, it becomes unfathomable. But when you look at the story of the universe, it's very very easy to figure out that, hey,
Yes.
already universe is doing it, and it will continue to do it.
Correct. Uh, sorry, I could carry on with this discussion for another at least 1 hour, uh, but I can see the timer, which already indicates that we've exceeded an hour. So, in case there are a few last comments, most of the questions that have come to me on the private chat, I have actually already woven into my discussions with you. But if the three of you would like to make a little, a small statement in order to wrap up today's discussion, then I'd like to leave this open to all three of you one by one, and then of course we can wrap up for today. So,
Yeah,
who would like to
I
start?
I would like for both Saloni and Nandini to talk about their personal learning, right,
Yes,
during this Gita, and what it meant for them and what difference
absolutely,
it made to their life. And then
absolutely.
I will have the last word. No, I will not have the last word. You will have the last word
Yeah,
after
today
me.
you don't get the last word, Nima. Today, unfortunately, you don't get the last word.
Yes, exactly. Today you get the last word, Ashwin.
Okay.
Okay. So either Nandini, Saloni.
Sure. Saloni, should I go? Well, I think the Gita's taught me a new way of looking at the world and looking at my place in it. So, to view the entire world as a yagna and my actions as a contribution to the grand scheme of things, and just basic, and to see the multiplicity and the multiplier effect of any action of mine, I thought is a very empowering kind of concept. And also, it shifts responsibility squarely on our shoulders, for what we do. And some of the examples that I can think is, I think the Gita gives me amazing tools for self-reflection. Um, small example I can think of is when I'm giving away things that I don't need. I would, rather than looking at it as I am helping somebody, I should actually be looking at it as I should be grateful that there is somebody who's there to take my things. And it's
Wow.
only when I give away something that is of value to me that I can pat myself on the back. But even then, the intent of giving has to be examined. Extremely overwhelmed by the challenges that I perceived. But
Okay.
then the Gita teaches you this concept of trusteeship. That even the if I relate it to the institution, that it has its own journey. It existed before the current board existed. It will continue its journey after. So, how to look at it as something that you look after while it is under your watch, do the best that you can, and then let it move on with its journey. So it helps me to approach my work with a lot more mental freedom. It's a lot more, a more motivating attitude to live with.
That's lovely. That's really lovely, Nandini. Saloni, you want to add something into this?
Well, for me, it was Nima said you should think about talking about how the Gita has impacted your life. And it's very hard to pinpoint. And so, for me, the topic that you chose, the science of spirituality, I use that as my starting point. And you think of science as something as a security, because science explains things to you. No matter how dark it is, that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, that the moon is going to come out in the night. Science explains things to you. So similarly, I find that the big picture concepts are very, very exhilarating and very, very empowering, and expansive. Like Nandini said, that whole concept of connectedness, that we are connected to everybody, it gives you that sense of responsibility. And equally, there is security, there is a level of peace when you understand that Ishvara is not a being out there who's there to punish you or to reward you. You are responsible for the outcomes in your life. And of course, there are unknowns, but it's not so scary to confront those unknowns as it is to feel like everything is random. And so that's the big picture. And then I find myself often reflecting on little things. Like I find the framework of ahankara, kama, and krodha an incredible framework. I find that it helps in difficult micro situations. Like when you're in that situation, you need to keep a difficult situation. You need to keep the communication group going. And at that stage, if you have kama, krodha, ahankara, it's not going to help. The discussion is going to end. And yet there is also a big picture to that, which is that kama and krodha and ahankara cause distortions in your mind. And then that whole paradigm of action comes in, where you have to do action. When you have experiences, then you unravel, then you sort of reflect on your behavior, and you're able to unravel how you've behaved and why you should have behaved differently, perhaps. And so I just find that it's a great alter ego almost. It's like a stream of consciousness. It's just there with me. And so I can't pinpoint where it has impacted my life, but it just is a wonderful framework to have to think within.
Beautiful.
Sorry, I
Lovely.
went. Thank
That's
you.
lovely. Okay, Nima, the second last word.
The second last one. Well, I think I feel that I'm so consumed by this teaching. And for me, the biggest reward is my students. Because I have been teaching, I decided to leave my job and they come to India not knowing exactly, who's going to be my student. After having lived abroad for 30 years, total uncertainty. And it's just, I don't know, it's a magic that I have so many people who come to me and they learn from me. But that's wonderful. But one thing that touches my heart, Ashwin, is when they come and they tell me that their life has changed. I feel that there is no bigger reward. I really, I mean, that gives meaning to my life. That I'm able to contribute to somebody's life. I mean, what more can I want? And not just something which is simple in terms of thought, which empowers them, makes them see a bigger picture, makes them fit their own personal life into a grand, larger scheme of things. I mean, I find that. I'm very, very happy that through me, this contribution, is being made to, and it is touching lives of many people.
Amazing. So, on that beautiful, beautiful note, let me just wrap up today's session. It has been an absolute delight. As I said, we could have carried on for a far longer time, but some of the thoughts that came to my mind. It was Victor Hugo who famously asked, "Where the telescope ends, the microscope begins, and which of the two has a grander view?" So in that sense, some of, for a person like me, I don't consider myself to be particularly spiritual, quote unquote, religious, quote unquote, but for a person like me, this has been truly an eye opener, and I'm wondering as to whether I'm looking through the microscope or whether I'm looking through the telescope. uh, the amazing thing about this particular book that has been penned by Nima, Nandini, and Saloni is the fact that it not only attempts to provide answers, but also to a very great extent ends up creating questions. That there is, I can't remember who had said that there is something in every atheist that's itching to believe, and something in every believer that's itching to doubt. And your book was one of those strange books which could get me to believe and doubt almost simultaneously. So that that has come across very, very beautifully. And uh, thank you also for a little bit of a change in terms of perspective. There is a कहावत which says that नजर बदलो तो नजारे बदल जाते हैं और सोच बदलो तो सितारे बदल जाते हैं. That we actually have the capacity to be able to actually influence the entire wider universe simply through our thoughts. And that was again something which emerged through your book. So for all those of you who haven't picked up this book, it's called Finding Meaning in Life with the Bhagavad Gita, by Nima Majbudar, Nandini Mirani, and Saloni Javeri. It's available on crossword bookstores, so you can buy it both online as well as at any of the crossword bookstores. And of course, as a author who has been an utter besharam to plug my book wherever I could, I am plugging in this one everywhere. Please go out there and buy it. And if you don't want to only buy it for yourself, buy it for all your friends and family, because it is truly something which can completely change your life. So, on that note, thank you so much, Nima, Saloni, and Nandini, for joining me today on this session. And I wish you all the very best for the success of this book, as well as for simply the success of your movement, for this thought process. So, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be in conversation with you.
Thank you so much. Thank
Take
you,
care, guys.
Ashwin.
All the
Really,
very
it's
best.
a pleasure engaging
Bye.
with you.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.